What's up, everyone? Welcome back to GMBookshop, and if you are new, a sub to the channel would be nice. Today, we're going to dive into something that's been on every parent's and student's mind lately: how to check the primary leaving examination, or PLE results from UNEB. And watch till the end to find out why you might fail to receive your results. Whether you're eagerly anticipating those grades or just want to be the first to share the news with your family group chat, I've got you covered. Let's jump right in. So first off, a little context. UNEB, which stands for the Uganda National Examinations Board, is responsible for conducting and releasing these results. And trust me, they've made it super simple for you to access them. No need to bribe your local cyber cafe guy to print them out anymore. Alright, here's how you can check the results. Grab your phone, your laptop, or even your neighbor's tablet if you have to. The easiest way is through SMS. For smartphones, open your messaging app. Tap Create New Message or Start Chat, depending on your app. In the recipient field, type 6600. In the message field, type, in capital letters, PLE followed by a space, and then the candidate's index number in the format, school code, stroke, student number, for example, U0065, stroke 12548. Hit send and you're good to go. For non-smartphones, open your messaging app. Type PLE followed by a space and then the candidate's index number in the format, school code, student number. Send the message to 6600. In just a few seconds after sending, you should receive a reply with the candidate's results. Keep in mind that this service costs a small fee, so make sure you have some credit on your account. Typically 500 to 600 Uganda shillings, depending on your mobile carrier. How cool is that? Now, let's talk about a few hiccups you might run into. If the SMS doesn't go through, double-check that index number. Seriously, one wrong digit, and you'll end up with someone else's results. Awkward. Also, keep in mind that sometimes there might be a slight delay due to high traffic on the system. If that happens, be patient and try again later. Another reason the SMS might fail is if UNEB has withheld results for certain schools due to exam malpractice. Additionally, the results might not be out yet. In such cases, keep an ear out for official announcements from UNEB or check again later. Also, make sure you have the enough credit on your account because this service is not free. And lastly, make sure you are using a supported mobile carrier, typically MTN Uganda or Airtel Uganda, as of recording this video. And that's it, folks. Checking your PLE UNEB results has never been easier. Whether you're celebrating or planning your next move, remember, these results are just one step in your journey. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more useful content, and share this video with someone who might need it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.